Okay. Are you ready? Let's see. Looking good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. And today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists of all time. I'm certainly not alone in appreciating this artist. In fact, I would make the argument that he is the single most successful artist in human history. We are talking about Walt Disney, and we're going to be painting his most famous creation of all time, Mickey Mouse, today. I am super excited to make today's painting. I've been a fan of Walt Disney for a long time. I've been a fan of Mickey Mouse since I was a little kid, as probably a billion other children have been. And I also just find Walt Disney as not only an artist but as an entrepreneur also very inspiring. I think it's incredible thinking of someone who began as an artist. He was an artist someone who really wanted to become an artist and worked a day job. At night he was doing evening classes. On the weekends he was doing weekend classes, and he was also doing correspondence art classes. Anything he could do to get the knowledge he needed in order to become an artist. He became an illustrator, started his own illustration company, worked for another illustration company that was doing some very primitive animation back in the early 1920s, and it blew his mind, and he saw the opportunities. This was a growing industry. I mean, it was an industry that didn't exist just a few years before, and he was right there on the ground floor. And, well, let's get right into it. There's a lot to talk about. I'm really excited about today's episode. So, you will see in the, there is a Dropbox folder in the description below, and you'll see in that Dropbox folder a whole bunch of subfolders, all of these other artworks in here that we've already talked about and painted. There's videos for every single one of these folders, and some of these folders have, like Tom Thompson, there's 4 videos here. Vincent van Gogh, there's 5 videos there, or 4. So we just finished a whole week of Pablo Picasso. We did do a previous Walt Disney episode where we talked about Bongo, but we really talked more about Bongo the bear than Walt Disney himself. So today I want to talk a little bit more about Walt Disney. Anyway, we look right down here, click in this folder, you'll see 3 files in here, one of which is the image of Mickey Mouse, and then there's an outline that I did on the iPad, my iPad Pro, using the Apple Pencil and the Procreate app, because people are always asking me, how do you do this? And then you can print it out on your inkjet or laser jet printer at home, or your photocopy printer at your office or work, on regular paper. I actually just printed out on a little bit thicker paper just because I've got a lot of cardstock and I've always really liked thicker paper, but it actually is easier if the paper's thinner. And then I'm going to show you here how to transfer that image onto the canvas. Maybe right before I show you how to do that, just a little quick housekeeping. I encourage you to join this Facebook group and upload your version of today's program to the Facebook group. This Saturday, in a couple days, we're going to be looking at all the art that's up there on the Facebook group, or a portion thereof, because there's so much. We have such an awesome, engaged group of people, this incredible community of artists. Some people who've been painting with me for over a year now, and some that had literally just joined about 20 minutes before we went on the air. 3 new people joined today. So people of all different levels of experiences, and people uploading their artwork and getting feedback from all these community members. It's so I mean, I just want to show you just the brand new things here. Here's an awesome painting by Shelley that she did here, based on a picture of her friend's children. Look at these paintings that Heidi did of a dog, right? And here's there's two different Heidis. I was like, here's another Heidi. This is the Picasso, one of the final Picasso painting we did of Picasso Week here. Awesome stuff. So people are uploading not only the stuff that we're doing in class, but things that they're working on outside of class, ideally, or things that they've learned from the class that they're applying towards their work on the outside of this wonderful space that we've created for one another. So we'll get into Disney's biography here in a second. Let's transfer the image onto the canvas, and then we'll kind of jump back to the biography. So come on. So I'm going to blow this up onto the big screen here, and I'm going to talk about it as I play it. So you'll see that I've got a canvas. This is a 9x12 sized canvas that we're going to paint on. I actually take it and put a little bit of acrylic gesso on the surface and let it dry overnight, and then sand it so it gets even smoother, and I just find that so much more helpful. And then I'm going to use some carbon paper to do the transfer. You can see, look how often I've used this same piece of carbon paper. I think this might be the last time that I use this piece, but I've used it maybe 20 times for 20 different images. And I just slide it under the image there. And then I'm going to begin by just tracing out the Mickey Mouse on top here. So let's just kind of breeze through this here really quickly. You get the idea. And then now I'm going to use a ruler to try to get some of these lines. And you can see that I've moved the carbon paper off to the side. That way I can draw a line and it'll actually extend past the paper onto that little bit of canvas, because the canvas is just a little bit bigger than the original, than the photocopy or the printout from the Dropbox, right? And I'm also, you can see, doing some drawing over top of shapes that I know are going to be black or a really dark color later on. So that's you can see I do this a few times, maybe by the feet as well. But either way, even if you do a line where it's not supposed to be, then it's acrylic paint and we can just paint it all out. So I'm not going to show this whole thing. Let's just speed it around, flip it upside down. That's kind of neat to see like that, isn't it? Oh, maybe it's just worth just seeing. I just want to share this. You can see I put a little bit of tape down on the bottom. Once I've got that done, I tear the tape off the top, and that's when I put it in here and then rotate it. All right, so you just want to make absolutely sure that you don't move the template on the top before you remove the tape, right? That's why I taped on the bottom before I took the tape off the top. Otherwise, you're in for a little bit of a surprise. Okay, so when you're all done that, you've got your canvas with an image on it, and then your the template. Now you can keep the template and you can make another version of today's painting, especially if the first attempt it doesn't turn out. Then what, you've lost a $2 canvas and you've got this printout which you could then use for 5-6 versions. Or you can do tests on here, give it to a small child in your family to color over, or maybe a large child in your family who might be yourself if you're youthful at heart. Okay, so let's I just want to get some paint on here really quickly, let it settle and dry, and while that's drying, we'll take a look at the biography of Walt Disney. and the history of Mickey Mouse, as well as Ub Iwerks, who is also played a huge role in the creation of Mickey Mouse. So here, I just put some warm yellow down onto this canvas, and then I poured some just regular tap water onto the palette here, and I'm going to just mix them together. And this is the only time I ever put water into my paint. It's okay to do this for the foundational layer of your painting, the colored ground, or what the Italians named the imprimatura, which means the first layer. And this is a traditional step that artists have been using for about 500 years. Although not every artist and every movement in art does this. I'd say this is less common today. I don't know why, because it actually saves time to do this. So why anyone would want to do something that takes more time, and I think looks inferior, but that's just maybe a personal taste. But it really also is just going to help seal the pencil marks in, so that it's less likely that we smudge them if we really start, being pretty rough with the way we paint the painting. It's sealed in. And I also like the glowing effect it creates. We also have this background in today's painting, which is pretty much the same color. Like if we just almost. So potentially, like really, now that I'm looking at it, I am tempted to put a thicker, darker coat of this on here. I haven't exactly thought about it. As I was getting ready for today's episode, like literally 5 minutes ago, I was looking at this image and going, "Oh, okay, that's a tricky background. How are you going to do that, Michael?" And I don't know just yet. That's why I need to sip my tea, because there are many different ways to go about that background. Let me just bring it back up here, which is where I'm going to start today's episode. So I'm going to think about which method that I want to use to do this while this dries for a few minutes. So while that's drying, let's just take a quick look at let's just quickly look at Walt Disney's biography here. Born on December 5th, 1901, and died 65 years later in California. So born in Chicago and dies in just outside of, or I guess Burbank is a part of Los Angeles. And most people don't. When I was putting this, I didn't realize that he holds the record for having won the most Academy Awards of all time. So he won 22 Oscar awards and was nominated 59 times. Now, almost every single one of those was as a producer, which is not to denigrate the role of a producer in the making of a film. Often it is one of the most important roles in films, and one of the ones that's probably most misunderstood by the general public, because the producer is often, is not always, but often the person who has the idea for a project and then goes out and finds the talent to help execute that idea. And hires a director, hires actors, hires animators in this instance, writers, etc. Sometimes producers go out and buy a book, the rights to a book, and then hire a writer to adapt it, then find the director to direct it, and then the director and the producer work together to cast it, and then there are sometimes sitting there in the editing room with the editor and the director. I mean, so on and so forth. So they play often a very important role in the production of a film. There is the executive producer, which are often people who just happen to give a bunch of money and sort of sit there on the sidelines and just get their name on the film. Totally different thing. But anyway, Walt Disney nominated for all those Oscars. Many of his films are essentially considered to be essential works in American culture, and are thus recorded in the Library of Congress. There's a lot here. I've spent the last week just reading a lot about his biography, and the more and more I was reading about it, the more impressed I was of just like how self-motivated this guy was. So as I said, his family, he's born in Chicago, his family moves to Kansas City, and while he's there, he's seeing vaudeville, he's seeing film is at its very, very early stages, and often during vaudeville performances, where vaudeville is like jugglers and comedians doing slapstick. This is pre-stand-up comedy. Sometimes there might be an opera singer. It's a whole bunch of random things, and vaudeville carries on into the late-night television shows that we have today, like Letterman and Leno and Conan O'Brien, Jimmy Fallon, etc. That's probably that, and maybe things like America's Got Talent. Is that how it's called? These kind of singing programs. And anyway, so he sees that, and often during vaudeville, a screen would come down and a short film, maybe a newsreel, because remember, this is before television news would be shown on a screen. And he's seeing this, and there's some also very, very early animations that are playing during these vaudeville performances. And he sees these things, and the wheels start grinding around in his mind. He starts doing some cartoons for the local high school newspaper. Even though he wasn't accepted into the Army, he does some drawings for the Stars and Stripes, which is the Army newspaper. And when he gets back to Kansas City after the war, he was working as an ambulance driver, and he decorated the ambulances. He becomes friends with Ub Iwerks. I think that's how Ub Iwerks. I'm pretty sure that's. I watched a few videos, and now I'm trying. That doesn't sound the way it sounded on the video, but anyway, these two guys become great friends, and the two of them later collaborate to create Mickey Mouse, and we'll talk about their collaboration there in a second. They do a whole bunch of different things, but one of the things that maybe it says up here somewhere. So while they're working at a graphic design firm, one of the things that the firm is creating is these cutout animations. Cutout animation is if you've ever seen South Park, it's probably the most famous version of cutout animation, although I don't think it's technically cutout. I think it's all done on the computer, but it gives you an idea, it's literally cut out pieces of paper and they're being moved around. We very rarely see that kind of animation done these days. But he's so inspired by it and sees the potential of it, and again has seen some of these things on screen at vaudeville performances, and starts thinking, whoa, there's some potential here. So he borrows a camera, he borrows some books, and goes home and starts making some animations in his side, like at his kitchen table, and eventually ends up spinning off and creating his own company. And now I'm jumping over a whole bunch of things here because I'm sure people aren't super interested in hearing all of these details. But kind of the main big move is that he moves to Hollywood, which I think at this time is Hollywood Land, in 1923 at age 21. And he goes there partly because his brother Roy, who later ends up running the Walt Disney Corporation after Walt passes away, is convalescing from tuberculosis. And, Los Angeles was a place back at the turn of the last century where people who had breathing ailments often went to Los Angeles. It was seen as a place that had
good air, which is ironic considering it's now very. I lived in Los Angeles for 12 years, and there is literally on the news every morning an index showing the air quality and pollution level. So, the two, Ub Iwerks and Disney, they start creating these drawings together and animations. Their first big one here is Oswald the Lucky Duck, or Lucky Rabbit, sorry, and which does fairly well, but Universal Pictures distributes it, and based on the contract that they created, Universal somehow ended up owning the character that Disney and Ub Iwerks created, which, you know, would have been huge. You know, it's like one of those, oh, did you read the fine print? Actually, we own the character. Sorry. Kind of, oh, right. So they go about like, okay, we got to read these contracts, and they set about creating a new character. Walt Disney does the initial sketches. So here's, we're not exactly sure who did these. We believe these are Walt Disney did these drawings, and then Ub Iwerks takes these sketches and, you know, develops them into the Mickey Mouse that we see in the first few here. Plain Crazy is the very, very first appearance of Mickey Mouse, and you can watch these videos. They're on YouTube. And this is and we also see the very first appearance of Minnie Mouse as well. She's right there at the very, very beginning of Mickey Mouse. It's not some kind of later thing that spun off to make money, or maybe it was, but it was made to make money at the very beginning. So there's Mickey and Minnie in the very, very first appearance on screen, called Plain Crazy, in May of 1928. There's another film that comes out shortly after, The Galloping Gaucho. And neither of these two early Mickey Mouse films are successful at all. They're big bombs. They don't really receive any distribution at all. So for basically they go unseen for decades, until it's not until November 1920, I think it's November 15th, 1928, that Steamboat Willie is introduced. And Steamboat Willie is a smash hit. You can watch the whole 7.5 minute long animation here on YouTube, and it's funny. It holds up today. There's colorized versions of it. Essentially, it's making a play on what is it? What is the Buster Keaton? I think is it Steamboat Jr.? Yeah, I can't. There's a Buster Keaton was a slapstick comic, silent film star. Probably not as well known today as he should be. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. Charlie Chaplin is probably far more famous person from that era. But anyway, Steamboat Willie is a hit, and of course, back then, if there's only so many movies being made, you make a movie and it's a hit. It's in every cinema everywhere, and Walt Disney becomes a household name. Right, so everyone's got to see it. There's gigantic lines to go see this animation. It's one of the very first animations also to have sound. There was sound before that, synchronized sound, but this is really, you know, this breaks through where you have adults. You know, originally a lot of cartoons were for adults as well. Anyway, there's lots of stuff to cover here, and I don't want to put everyone to sleep hearing about the history of Mickey Mouse, because there are lots of great videos. Speaking of which, I love this. This is a thumbnail for a video, which is right here. This Dave Lee Down Under does a really good survey talking about how Mickey Mouse changed over the years. And we're going to begin with not the very, very, very first appearance of Mickey Mouse here in Plain Crazy or The Galloping Gaucho. We're going to go to Steamboat Willie, which is where our character in today's painting is from, right? And essentially what the main things that we see here are the look of the eyes and the shoes. Those are the two main differences from the earliest version of Mickey Mouse to this one. And then, of course, as time progresses, what I think is really interesting, you know, this is maybe the 1960s Fantasia era where Mickey Mouse's eyes really change a second time. And just it has this 80s look. So how this looks like I've talked enough to make the canvas dry. Great. Okay, so let's think about how we want to paint this now, because these lines in the background have the potential to drag this painting out for hours. Because as you may know, doing this kind of a faded look is pretty tricky. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to put another layer. Let's get some more paint onto this canvas. I'm going to put some more yellow on that background. Now, maybe I could have done this before, but I didn't know until just now how I wanted to approach this. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this warm yellow, just going to paint it over the whole thing. And then I'm going to blow dry this. But we're going to see this warm yellow come through the image. Oops, sorry. And we're going to paint some white over top. And those of you that have been painting with me for a while, if you've got another strategy that you want to use, I'd love to see you do it and to see how it turns out, especially if they're posted up on the Facebook. Because, yeah, again, I think what I'm going to do is we're going to paint this, obviously, yellow, just as I'm doing here, a second coat, a thicker coat without any water. And then I'm going to paint the white rays on here. And then I think I'll do a little bit of glazing to fade those rays out a little bit. So, nice kind of pretty even surface here. So because this yellow is going to show through, it is helpful to get as even of a coating as possible. Okay. So inside the face here, we're going to put other colors, so I'm not concerned about that. I was just looking for areas where it was patchy. On the outside here. Okay, cool. I'm just going to wipe the excess off my brush. Okay. So I'm going to blow dry this really quickly just to speed up this process. And in doing so, I'm going to mute the microphone momentarily here. Okay, so usually at this time I start putting a bunch of paint onto the canvas. These are canvas boards that I ordered from Amazon. That are not linked in the description below, because these ones I've noticed are kind of warping a little bit. So there are other ones that I've bought that I have used, and they are linked in the description below, that I do recommend, because I've made 150 paintings with them. These are brand new ones that don't seem to be quite as effective. It's just a tiny little pet peeve of mine when these things warp. So I have to. I'm being careful not to crack it and bend it. Okay. So as I said, usually I start putting some paint on my palette here, but because I'm going to work on the background for about the next probably 20 minutes here, I'm going to hold off on that. Because what I want to do to start is, let's use some white out of the tube even, yeah. So I'm going to take some white. Let's move the painting out of the way before. You know, there's things where I think, you know what? This is just asking for trouble. Okay. So I put a little bit of white on here, because what I'm going to do is we're going to mix this. You can see we've got a really nice warm yellow, but a lot of this color has got white in it. All right, so I'm going to take this white and mix it in here. In fact, let's take more of it. You can see I'm trying to mix basically as much of it as possible, because I don't want little streaks of color that is darker or lighter. I want this to be nice and even, right? Okay, let's move that to the side. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around in a circle here, and I'm going to get a smaller brush as well to get into the fine details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in these lines. And I'm kind of trying to cover a little bit of the pencil marks. That's really one of my main goals right here. I don't mind if they come through a little bit, because we are going to kind of be playing with those edges. So they'll kind of disappear, and if they stay there a little bit, that's okay. And don't worry about, like, oh no, you did that one, I actually did my lines. Don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. You'll notice this isn't totally white. I will use some white, but I'm going to build up to that point here. So this is why I'm doing this now rather than painting the Mouse, Mickey Mouse himself first. Otherwise, can you imagine how much of a pain this could be? Trying to paint around some of those details. Let's just brighten these. So we are going to lose maybe a little bit of the detail of like the outlines of some of the parts of the body, like in these legs. But don't fear. We're going to... I'm going to be in the same position as you, so I'll just show you how we'll fix that. Like I say all the time, is you don't want to become overly reliant on your outlines. They're there to help you, not to imprison you and make you completely dependent on them. Even though I'm not sure if I can see that line behind that hand, I'm not going to take that risk, so I'm just going to paint that in there. So as I get closer towards the end, my fear becomes like, uh-oh, am I gonna... Is there gonna be like enough of these starbursts, or am I gonna run out? Or like, am I gonna accidentally have done the wrong thing? It looks like I have, so... I have kind of done... Got an extra line that doesn't fit with anything, which is okay. So you can see how there's this little in-between area. I'm just gonna fudge it. That's okay. Okay. So I'm just gonna now go back to the beginning and just go back over some of these where it's still a little bit transparent. Because there was some water that from my original yellow layer that was in there, so I'm just made this paint a little bit transparent, considering how much white I put in it. Just almost done here. So there's still going to be probably a little bit of pencil lines by the very end. That's never been particularly a concern for me. I don't mind it if a bit of my work shows through by the end. If that was a real big problem for you and you wanted it to be, I guess, quote unquote, a little bit cleaner and to hide those things, then you could you know, draw your lines a little bit lighter when you're transferring the image. Okay. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some glazing fluid. I'm going to put glazing fluid in here. And actually, I'm just going to quickly blow dry that before I move on. So I'm just going to mute them. Olga asks, Michael, you may have told us a zillion times, but how do you make, or what is the process for the outlines that you make for these paintings? So I use an app on my iPad Pro. The app is called Procreate, like professional create. It is it's like the standard app that most illustrators use on the iPad. So, and I just bring the image in and I just trace over it, and then I export it and print it. Right, pretty straightforward. You can just reduce the opacity. It means making the artwork or the photograph lighter, so it's more transparent, and that way you can draw over top of it, and you can distinguish your lines from the background image. So now I'm just going to take this glazing fluid and adding a bit of the paint to the fluid. So now I've got maybe like 4:1 glazing fluid in here. And I'm going to take this and just kind of go on these outside. This looks like maybe, you know what? I'm gonna go between all of these lines. Like this. I'm just thinking, like, just for time, like I could very carefully blend each of these rays outwards. I think that's just going to take me forever. So what I'm doing here is now putting this glaze in between these lines. So I'm kind of covering up a bit of that warm yellow that I put down there originally. This is why I was saying there's a bunch of different ways to do this, and I couldn't quite land on which one I wanted to do most. This is going to soften up those edges a little bit. And then we're going to glaze with some warm yellow back on top of everything. Pretty confident this will work. I'm just not sure if it's the best method. It's also, I'm trying to think of like what's the method that is most easily followed by the most amount of people, because after all, this is a class, right? So you might on camera it does look like most of Mickey Mouse has disappeared. Maybe if I darken this. Oh, not to turn it off. Come on. Yeah, I'm not sure if that maybe I'll even darken it even more. You can see that the outlines are still there, right? So I'm just kind of painting over them. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to do another layer now where I just sort of get a little bit, so I'm going to have more glazing, or maybe I guess, I'll just show you. Let's put a bunch of glazing fluid in here. I should blow dry this. That's the one thing I learn over and over again is when you glaze, make sure this is nice and dry before you add another glaze over top. Otherwise, you're not only going to like wipe away what you just put there, but you can also wipe away under like layers that are there below it. So I'm just going to mute this and blow dry for a moment. Okay, so now I'm going to take more of this paint. In fact, I'm going to just get a bit more yellow out. A bit more white as well. So I'm going to get a little bit more opaque and a little bit less glaze here. So let's take some paint. Basically the same mixture as before, but just a little bit less glazing fluid in here. And then try to soften those edges. Okay, then rubbing the excess off. So I'm not sure how it's looking on camera, but in person it looks great. Now I'm going to put a little bit of warm yellow back in between these lines as well. So if you're like, ah, it's not turning out, don't worry. This is a bit of a process to get this done. So it's just about like just smoothing these edges of these rays so that they're not so harsh. I keep thinking to myself, things are going better than expected. I'm actually pleasantly surprised, and then I'm thinking, like, don't jinx yourself, Michael. Every time you start to get really excited or a little bit overconfident, that's when I fall flat on my face. So, so this brush is just a regular brush that I use for doing, I mean, I think it's, well, it's almost the exact same, a different brand, but it's not my usual blending brush, because the one thing with using my mop brush, right, this is often the brush I use for doing most of my blending. The thing with that is it's really, really big. It's a big, wide brush, and it's not so good for small, little, narrow areas like this. Like, so there's these areas where it's sort of in between. That's okay. I'm just gonna, my goal is really to soften from the more solid center towards the edge. I'm also not putting gobs of this paint on. It's almost like I'm a bit of a dry brush technique here, where I'm just getting a bit on here, and then I'm kind of just like kind of wiping it away a bit. I don't know how to. Let's also try a different angle. Just softening all of these edges here. You know, now that I'm doing this, I'm thinking maybe I could have done this from the outset. The only thing that would have complicated it is because how dark these dark lines would have been. They would have just really shown through and been really distracting. Whereas at least now I've kind of covered them and they're not as prominent. The other thing that I think about as I'm doing this is maybe I could have just had like a white off-white as my background and done the opposite with the darker yellow. That could have worked as well. That's why I was saying, like, there's a lot of different ways of going about this. So I wasn't exactly sure which one would be the most effective. And you know, that's pretty typical when you're making an artwork, is you start, and then it's not until you get started you're like, oh, you know what, now that I'm a little bit in, there's another way I could have done it. And as long as, like, you have those moments of if you recognize a different possibility while you're working on it, that's great too. That shows that you're learning. So that's turned out pretty good. There are a few places where I want to do it a little bit more. In fact, actually, I'm just going to now go over the center of some of these. And maybe this time I'm just going to take the paint right out of the tube. You know what? This is a bad idea, because I'm going to start peeling the paint that was there off. So I'm just going to blow dry this. Take my advice that I tell people all the time that I never listen to on my own. I'm going to blow dry this. Olga says, it's great seeing how you use the second brush to get soft edges. I've struggled with that, and thanks for the brush techniques. Continual problem solving. Yes, learning all the... I'm always learning with Michael. Thank you, I appreciate that. So yeah, let's continue here. This time, let's put a little bit more white into this mixture. And we're going to really focus this time on the center of these rays. Unless there's any rays that I feel would benefit maybe from a little bit more of this. Maybe that might have been still a little bit rough. Now that I'm doing this, I'm remembering why I chose this path over painting it all white and then painting the warm red or yellow over top. Is because if I did that, I wouldn't really be able to see much of anything at all, because the white would cover up all my lines so much. So this way allows me to preserve some of my lines. So at this moment, I haven't changed anything. I'm just doing basically the exact same thing a second time, just to get nice transitions here. And also there's a few places where my pencil lines were still really dark, especially it seems like towards the outside edge of the canvas. And it's not a deal breaker, it's just sort of like, well, if I spend another 5 minutes on this, they'll disappear or be almost completely gone, and then I won't be thinking about it every time I look at this painting, right? And you could just do as many of these as you like until your pencil lines are gone. So really, at this moment, I'm just focused on the outer, sort of the basically right on top of my pencil lines. Maybe that's the best way to think about it. And it's also really important that this brush that I'm using for blending is dry. Not cleaned and just a little bit damp, but like bone dry. Like it's been sitting there drying at least overnight, or I guess you could try using a blow dryer, but you want it to be bone dry. The more, if it's wet, rather than getting nice soft blending, what's going to end up happening is the oops, there's too much white in there. If that, then you're going to actually be like scrubbing paint off the surface. I want to have a little bit too much white, and I dipped my paintbrush in the wrong part of my palette. That's okay. Seems like I did the same thing there. Sometimes you just get little pockets of paint that are just lighter than the others that you didn't. Remember, I was trying to mix it in as thoroughly as possible. You know, it's like if you've ever done any baking and you make banana bread and you've tried to mix in all your ingredients and get the walnuts, or maybe if you put nuts or anything in there, just to be nice and even, and then when you go to eat them later, there's like that one bite you bite in, and it's just like you're biting into the side of a banana, or into like 5 walnut pieces all right together. You know, it's just, as much as you might try to get it as even as possible, there's just sometimes the universe wants you to have a little bit more walnuts in that particular bite, and that's just the way the banana loaf crumbles. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, again, I'm going to blow dry this one more time, and then I'm going to go and add a lot more white, and we're going to do the same thing, but just I'm going to go use a smaller brush, and we'll just sort of get a little bit of the white right in the center. Okay, so I'm going to mute the microphone. Okay. So now I'm going to take white, a lot more of it this time. Right, I'm just taking a look just to see what it looks like. I think that's pretty good. And I'm going to add a bit of glazing fluid in this. It's going to make it a little bit more transparent, but it's also going to make, so this is, the glazing fluid is a great blending medium. Really, that's essentially what glazing, well, it's not, no, I guess I was going to say that's what glazing is, but glazing can be many different kinds of things, and I often use glazing fluid as a blending medium. So this is going to be just it's going to have, like, white is our best color for covering things up, right? So we're adding glazing fluid. It's going to make that white a little bit more transparent. And, okay. So we still got our brush that we're going to use. And let's now take this, and you see that? So now I'm just painting the interior of these beams. Where's... That's why I'm using a much smaller brush. Again, I want to make sure that it's dry. I'm also not putting much paint on here, right? You don't want to have a really big gobs of thick paint, because then it's really hard to blend it. It's, or at least using this particular method, right? If I had big gobs of paint, then it's going to make this paintbrush really wet, and then I'm going to have to use a different brush. I'm imagining I might do 2 coats of this. At the moment, basically, this line is almost consistent. It's pretty much just a straight, thin line. On the second coat I do this, I'm going to take more attention to kind of widen it at the towards the edge of the canvas. If you find that, like, the line is maybe a little bit too visible, then you could do what I just did there. Sort of just try to really quickly scrub it out a little bit. And this is, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? I'm not, maybe it seems like I'm spending an inordinately long time doing this, but it's also, you know, every painting we do, I intend as like a lesson, right? And so it's not just about painting Mickey Mouse. In fact, we could be painting anything. I see it as like, okay, we'll learn a little bit about Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks, but at the end of the day, it's it's a painting class, not a art history class. I'm just obsessed with history, and it gives me a good excuse to watch a whole bunch of videos and read books. Prior to the pandemic, I used to spend and prior to having a child, I used to spend maybe 3 or 4 days, full days, at the library, just reading about art and art history and different artists, and very self-indulgent. But it always got me really pumped to go back to my studio and to work, because I'd be just so excited to think of all the great achievements that humans have made over time. And so yeah, Olga says, continual problem solving. Every painting is is a challenge. It's a problem, in the best way possible. Like a crossword puzzle is a problem, right? And it's okay, how do you solve this one? What's the secret behind figuring this thing out? And I think it was Lolly, I was asking last class about what I've learned after having done all of these episodes, right? Today's episode 150 of just the painting class, right? I've done 150 episodes teaching people how to paint. And I did 100 episodes showing people how to draw and take photos. So I did a whole 40 episode drawing course here on YouTube. It's all free, links in the description. I did I think it's 10 or 20 episodes of a photography class. Again, I don't think that's in the description, but I think it's somewhere on my YouTube page. And if you're watching this right now, you're watching my YouTube. You can watch that if you want to learn a little bit about how to use your digital camera. And even before I did that, I spent a month at the very well, it was, I think, right before the pandemic hit, and I was experimenting with live streaming. I was kind of wanting to do it for a long time. And I was making a mobile for our daughter's bedroom. And was using the sewing machine. Probably the least interesting of all of the videos I've posted on YouTube ever, but I was wanting to learn the technology, and if anybody wanted to watch, they could watch. If no one wanted to watch, that's okay too. Okay. That's pretty good. I am tempted to put some yellow back in between. Do I want to do that? I don't know if it merits it. I think this has turned out pretty good. I might just do a couple little touch-ups and then move on to actually painting Mickey himself. Oh, there's my mom in the chat there. Says, Michael, your Aunt Jeannie painted Mickey on your bedroom wall at the last house. Too bad we had to leave him behind. That's so funny. I mean, I was going to say I have a memory of that, but I would have been too young to really have a memory. I'm sure there's a photo of it. And my aunt just celebrated her birthday yesterday, so... Or was it the day before? Either way, what a funny, odd coincidence, hey? Love you, Mom. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Okay, I'm feeling really good about this, so yeah, we'll finish this. I think I'm happy without, because the thing that I was thinking about doing, or I was planning on doing, was to do now a coat with the warm yellow in between here and get maybe a little bit more contrast, so we'd have these bright beams of light and then some warm lines in between, which would really make, you know, I think it would look really cool. But it's also like, I don't know, I think it's this turned out well enough that, you know, I don't know if I need to do that anymore. And I'm sure not everybody, you know, when I make these videos and we spend an hour on the background or 2 hours and people are like, oh my goodness, you spent all this time on the background, like what about the thing in the foreground? That's the most important part. To which I think I answer, like, is it though? Is the figure in the middle of the picture more important than the background? Sometimes it is, you know, depending on the painting you're making. But I would argue really that the background in this particular painting is really what makes this image like really sing and really pop. I mean, there's lots of images of Mickey Mouse out there, right? He's been around for, I guess, 100, or well, what, coming, I think 20, yeah, 2018 was the 90th anniversary. So we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of Mickey Mouse in just a few years, in 2028. So that's a lot of films, television shows, etc. that this character has appeared in. And yet this is an image that immediately struck me as like the one that I wanted to do related to him. I wasn't consciously thinking about the background, maybe at the time. A lot of them just had plain, empty, boring backgrounds, and I think I was just like, whoa, that's cool. Okay. So I've gone around a few times. I'm almost around the far side here. I think I've got a visitor. Let's just take a little second here to move that out of the way. You want to come here? Wow, you're so big now. There was a time when now you're gonna, if you walk in, you'll bump into the overhead camera. This is our daughter, Edie. Look how tall you are. Oh my gosh, this makes me both so happy and so... Oh, let's not... Yeah. We're painting Mickey Mouse. You see that little mouse there? Aww.
You just thought we'd come say hi.
Aw, thank you for saying hello.
Can you
Grandma's...
say hi to everybody?
Hello! Say hi to everyone, Edie. I love you, kiddo. Aw. Thank you.
Happy painting! Bye!
Love you guys. Thanks for visiting.
Happy painting.
Aww. Okay. Thanks for indulging me there. That is crazy. How big. Sometimes when we do something together that we haven't done in a while, it's like, whoa. Last time we were here on this swing, like, sometimes we go to a different... I try to go to a different playground every couple of days around town, and there's times where we go to one we haven't been to in months. And it's like, whoa, last time we were here you could run right underneath that, you know, like underneath the slide, and she'll run under it and bonk her head on it because she's the same sort of thing. She's like, what? Why this thing just got lower all of a sudden? So, almost done here. I'll also say that there is a little bit of glazing fluid in this final layer, but very little of it. Really, this is just now brushing the paint in. And most of my pencil lines are also gone. In fact, really what I'm doing right now is just sort of getting rid of the last little bits of it. So... I seem to kind of see the pencil lines tend to be kind of appearing towards the outside edges. I think that's just because the way that the brush at the outside edge is kind of it's maybe a little brushing a little bit harder right there. I don't know. I mean, I could focus on this all night, but it is very satisfying to see it come together, so I'm kind of indulging myself a little bit here. The other thing too, it's helpful just to kind of stand back a little bit. In fact, I'm just going to zoom out so I can see it all at once, because when I'm like this, it's hard to really see how effective it is. Like now that I see it on the screen and zoom, when I stand back a little bit, like I see this area. It needs to be widened a little bit. Okay, I think that's good enough. And I don't think I'm going to put any of the orange lines back in between, or the warm yellow. I think that this is more than good enough. And if anything, that's just going to take me longer, and it might get 10% better. So sometimes, and not only that, it might get 10% better, but it could also get 80% worse, right? So that's, you know, and that's advice I need to take more often, like on these episodes too, where it's like, I'm almost done. 5% better. You could do 5% better, but we could go the other way, and then I could be here for another hour. So it's kind of like, what is the, like, at what point do you just know when to fold them, know when to hold them? Right, I think that's good enough. Good enough for government work, as my grandfather always used to say. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry this one more quick time before I start painting the actual Mickey Mouse over top of this, and then we'll. Okay. Okay, so now we got, I think, a really cool image. I mean, you could just make a painting that looks like that. I mean, if we connected these in the middle, I could see a few people going, you know, I'm pretty happy, like, just leaving it like that. Who needs Mickey Mouse on here? I'm pretty happy, right? So, but I am going to continue working on this painting. So let's start putting some paint on the palette, right? That's why I have two palettes. I like to have one where I can use for the background and I can kind of get it all messy, and then another one for another part of the painting. I actually have a few more palettes. I've got a few of everything. I just spent $300 at the art supply store today buying paper, but that's for my graphic novel, and so I'm going to use it all. But sometimes it's going to the art supply store is dangerous. So maybe I'm just going to look at the painting, just see. I think we need We're gonna need warm yellow, warm red. Let's get our box of paints out here. And should I use black today? I think I will. I think I will use black. I don't often use black, but it is, I think, yeah, it is kind of a feature of Mickey Mouse, is that really dark black as opposed to mixing a really dark gray. So, cool yellow. Not sure if I'll use that. We're going to need more white, so let's put that on here. Warm red, obviously, for Mickey's trousers. And for his boots, so that does look like a warm brown, so a cool blue, not sure yet. And there's some warm yellow in the gloves, so I'm just going to transfer that onto here. There might have been a bit of white that I might have just got on that color, but I think that's okay for right now. Okay. So let's just sort of think about the next step. Now we've got our background created here. So really, if I'm going to use black, and even if I was to make my own black using cold blue, warm red, and a little bit of cold yellow, as we've done in about 130 or so episodes, even if I was to do that, I would do that, it would be the very last thing I make on this painting. So what I want to do now is paint the yellow, let's say on the gloves, the white on the face, and the red and the brown. The only thing that worries me is sometimes those colors are a little bit transparent. So especially the red, that red, oops, is going to be a bit transparent. And if I paint it right over top of this, I might see a little bit of variation where I'm painting over the white and where there's a little bit thinner white. And so I might end up seeing some of those, the rays shining through here. So I am very tempted to put white over a lot of the interior of the character here. And that makes me think, if you're going to do that, maybe you should do a little bit of outlining of the figure in those areas. So let's do that. And rather than using black, let's use a different color. What might be just a slightly different color? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to do a very quick little bit of outlining. I'm going to use cold blue because it tends to be just a little bit darker and a little bit less transparent than the warm blue. And yeah, I got paint on my face. Okay. So you can see, like, these lines are pretty rough, because I'm going to paint white right over top of all of this. Same thing. Oops, let's go to this hand up here. Now I could use a pencil. A pencil could work. The only thing with using a pencil is it might, because this paint is probably still a little bit wet, it's dry to the touch, but if I try to start drawing on this, I'm afraid that I'm going to start actually, like, I could end up drawing and peeling some of the paint away. So obviously I'm not interested in doing that. Let's come down here. So you could outline the entire thing. I'm just going over lines that I think that I really need to be able to see. I can still see some of them anyway, but it's like these little these little details that maybe let's do this as well. Okay. Heidi says, good to see your lovely family, Michael. Big thank you for their support. That's a great point, Heidi. I appreciate you saying that. Every one of these paintings is done because I have a great wife who helps out. Some of these videos I'm pure painting late, and she has to do all of the bedtime routine on her own, which is not easy. It's especially she works all day long, and so usually I take care of our daughter all day long, or I'm teaching at the university. So, you know, when you work all day long and then you've got to work, taking care of a child is fun. It's the most uplifting, greatest experience of my life. But it's also, it just takes a little bit of work, takes a bit of energy. Okay, so I'm going to take a small brush next. And I'm actually, you know what, before I do that, let's blow dry this, because I don't want that blue paint getting anywhere. So let's just, to help the blow drying process, just going to make sure I don't have any big blobs of paint there. Now I'm going to take my white, and I'm just going to go over top of these areas here. So let's, now the face itself is obviously going to be white, right? That's the main area. So obviously this is going to be all white. But the trousers are going to be red, and the hands are going to be yellow. And I'm still going to put white over those areas as well. Now I'm not gobbing this paint on. I'm kind of putting a thin layer on. One, because I don't want, if it's really thick paint, then it's a pain to dry, and I don't want big thick areas of texture. And if it's thin, I can really kind of control how opaque it is. And I can decide, oh, okay, that's maybe a little bit too thick. I can't even see the lines I just painted on there. So right, so you can imagine how helpful it was to paint those lines, because now I can still barely see what's going on down there, right? So let's do this hand. So I'm not so concerned about making this really white, and because the yellow will cover up all of this white, but having it even just a little bit of this white is just going to make that next layer of paint really nice and solid, and I won't have the background kind of bleeding through here. Cool. That makes me happy. It looks kind of funny like this at this particular stage, but you can see when it's all done, everything is going to look great, and people will be like, "Oh, cool." And it's this kind of intermediate place where sometimes people get really anxious because it feels like the painting is just falling off the rails. We talk about this almost every episode because every single painting has a phase like this where things feel kind of worrisome. And the more you paint, the more you just get to a place where you expect to arrive here at some point. You know, it's like making a painting it's like getting on a train somewhere, and the train is on, there's tracks there, and it's got to make a stop at this station no matter what. It's gonna go through Bizarroville, and there's no avoiding this particular station. You're gonna stop there, and sometimes you're gonna spend a little bit longer in this Bizarroville. But as long as you know that you're going to pass through here, and the keyword is passing through, that eventually the train is going to start up again and move on. If you know that that's going to happen, and you expect it to happen, then when it does inevitably happen, it's like, oh, okay, well, I was just waiting for this moment, and here we are. That's cool. Okay, so we'll just paint it through, and I'm just gonna make. It's when people aren't expecting it to happen where they're the most alarmed and frustrated and upset, and when I'm painting in person, and there's always a few people who get to this midway point and they're just like, ugh, I think I better just call it a day. This is not working out. I think I'm just gonna go home. And I'm like, oh no, why? It's what a mess. Look at this thing. I'm like, we expected to be here. What you know, it'd be like if you were taking a train home from work and you pass through that bizarro town, you're like, well, I guess I better just get off. you know, this was a disaster. It's like, what? How are you going to get home if you get off here? Oh, you mean I got to stay on the train to get home? Yeah, we go through this every single time we get here. We have to stay on the train in order to go home. Okay. Well, I'll just sit down and ride it out. Okay, so now I'm just going to go back over this face with some more white. And my lines underneath are going to be barely visible. And if they disappear completely, that's okay. It's not like, you know, it's World War III and we've got to run for cover or anything. All considering, it's not that, you know, bad of a situation. Far worse things can happen to a person than losing your guidelines on a painting. And even then, I think again it's a great, you know, challenge to see how much you can do when you don't see those outlines there. Okay, so I'll just zoom back out and you can see what this looks like. So that's where we are at this stage of the process. And you should noticeably see that the white on the face is a little bit more opaque than the rest of it. The rest of it I don't mind being a little bit semi-transparent because we're going to paint color over it, right? But here, you know, it's important that this face be white. Now that I'm even looking at it, I see it's also slightly off white, slightly bit of a like unbleached titanium, like a bit of a brown. Like we could take this brown that we've got down here, add a, you know, take white and take a tiny bit of it and paint it over here. I don't think I'm going to do that. But if you wanted to get even closer to that level of authenticity. Okay. Well, he says, Michael, what is the novel you're working on going to be about? Can you say, or is it secret stuff? It's I think 185-page graphic novel. Almost all of it is hand painted like this. About the artist Tom Thompson, who was a famous Canadian artist who died under mysterious circumstances 100 years ago. And we actually did a whole week on the art of Tom Thompson. So if you want to go back to, I think it was the first couple weeks of July, we did that of this year. And those folders are in the Dropbox below if you want. He was a landscape painter. So that's what I get up every morning at 5 a.m. and just come down here and work. And then get our daughter up at 8:30-ish or so. And then I spend my then she goes and takes a nap, and then I spend my afternoons with you lovely people. And then the whole process, then I put our daughter to bed, and the whole process starts all over again. That's my day in a nutshell. So let's what should we you know, I don't know, it doesn't matter what we do next. Let's do the hands, I think. So there is, you know, this little bit of rendering on here, this little bit of red, but we can do that as a glaze towards the end here. So I'm just going to ignore that. I'm going to go right to my warm yellow. part of me thinks I should go a little bit more brown here. So, you know what I'm going to do? Let's mix the brown for the shoes, and then I can kind of come back here. So let's do this down here. We'll take this warm yellow, warm red. That's a little bit, well, I was going to say that was a little too much warm red, but we'll see here. That's very dark. Not too far off, though, now that I'm looking at it, I gotta say. But I think at the very least I want a bit more red and make it a bit more of a reddish brown. Well, now that I see it, that might be a little bit too red. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so let's now I think I'm going to use a Posca pen to do some outlining. So I'm not even too super concerned about making my outlines look all like the best in the entire world. It looks like I'm going to lose those blue lines I did in this area, which doesn't bother me personally. I mean, these shoes are relatively straightforward, but well, I'll show you when we get a little closer there what that looks like. It's when the black lines come in here, all of a sudden the whole painting is going to snap into view, and it'll be like, oh wow, cool. So if you've never done a painting like this, I could imagine there's maybe a bit of skepticism as to like, I'm not sure if I completely follow this method. I'm not sure if we're going to get there. So, obviously, if you're watching this video after I record, you can just go to the end and take a look and decide for yourself. Now, this is a little bit, streaky, shall we say, right? So, I think another coat of paint is going to help. So maybe I'll just let that dry for a few minutes, and while that's drying, I'm gonna paint the red, and we'll come back to that brown. Probably by the time I get this red in, that brown will be mostly dry. The one thing I would just caution everyone about is when you're doing this kind of thing, just be careful of where your hand is on this painting. If you make a big boo-boo and get paint all over the background that we've spent all that time doing, it can be fixed, but it is, you know, it'd be a little bit of a trick to it. And if you've watched me long enough, that's probably a sign that I'm minutes away from making the very mistake that I'm talking about. So we'll see if I can make it to the end without getting paint all over my background, which I've just finished. Which would be a bummer for me, but if I end up having to do that, then it might be good for you to see how I solve that problem, even as much as it would drive me bonkers. But the feedback I get from people like yourself watching is often people appreciate seeing me problem solve mistakes. Or happy accidents, as Bob Ross used to say. And so there's a little bit of streakiness to this red as well. So we'll come back and we'll do that again separately. I think while all of this... Okay, so let's now... Remember I said I was going to... mix... taking this warm yellow. Just going to take a bit of brown and put it in here. Like, you can see just a little bit. Almost invisible amount. Just enough to give it a little bit more contrast, especially since we have this warm yellow in the background. I was the reason why, the other thing I was thinking about doing is when I was thinking about putting these radiating lines, I was considering putting cool yellow there. Obviously I didn't do that, but it was a consideration for sure. Oh, that's great. So this is almost a little bit more of a golden color than the warm yellow. So this is a little bit, maybe a little bit more... I think this is a little bit darker maybe than even I was expecting or wanting. But now that I'm painting with it, I'm actually, I like it. It sort of gives it a little bit of a vintagey kind of quality, I gotta say. Obviously, you're welcome just to use the warm yellow right out of the tube. I think it would work just fine. And again, just like the other ones, it's a little bit patchy, but I might do another coat here. And it's just, you just wait for it to dry, just be a little bit patient. a little ridge here. I'm just, oop. There you go. That's what happens when you're painting wet and wet right next to one another. Got a little bit of a white spot showing through there. So, let's blow dry this. So where should we pick up first? Should we go back to the, just do this in the order we created, go back to the brown here? I am gonna maybe put just a bit more yellow in there. I think that barely is gonna change anything, but like wow, like all of a sudden it just goes nice and solid color. Boom. We don't need nearly as much of it. What a difference that makes, right? So we, you know, when we have, you know, we could work much faster and be done much faster if we just do one coat of paint. But boy, oh boy, a second coat just can be transformative on a painting. I will say, like, the way that, you know, the original does have a little bit more transparency in these shoes. And if we wanted that, we could have done this as a glaze, and we would have a little bit more of the yellow coming in underneath, or we could have put white, put the warm yellow back on top of the white, and then put the brown in as a glaze, and it would look great, but... let's go to our warm red, just right out of the tube. No additives or anything. Our pure organic warm red. It's interesting. I wonder if there's such thing as like an organic paint brand. Probably a good idea if you're looking to start a business. I mean, the art industry is kind of notorious for materials that are less than they can be very toxic and to not only people but also to the environment as well. You know, it's sort of like a bit of a dirty secret that people don't often talk about, but exists for sure. Okay. Now let's go back to these hands. I'm just going to put a little bit more warm yellow in here and back off a bit of that dark color that I had here. This color is going to maybe make it, yeah, I think I did make a big deal of saying, oh, I like that kind of golden color. It's coming through here, so it's not like I'm painting it all out. I think I just was like, yeah, you know, that's a little bit too much. And that's also the benefit of doing multiple layers of paint, is if you're knowing you're going to do another layer of paint at some point, you can play a little bit by adding, you know, making that the color that's the first coat either a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. I mean, not radically different, but, you know, if it's in the ballpark, it does give you a little bit of, you know, a way of taking a look at how that might work if you were to keep it. And you know that, well, okay, I can always brighten or darken it on my second pass. So what does, you know, so you saw me sort of experiment with a bit of a more slightly brownish warm yellow. And then change my mind. Okay. Cool. Now basically all we have to do is put black in here. Alright, so we've got everything in place. It's just the final layer of black, which is going to just completely change this painting. I mean, we could do a little bit of glazing now, because the thing is, if we put black down and we put some glazing, it might reduce the intensity of that black a little bit. So if you do want to do glazing, it might be a good idea to do that now. So I'm just thinking to myself, when I look at this painting, do I want to put this little bit of kind of rouge on the face? Maybe I do. Okay, so let's, before I do that, mute the microphone. So I was just trying to decide here if I want to take this white and just modify it slightly. let me see. Let me just do a quick, we can test, and if we don't like it, we can wipe it away. So, oh, there's, okay. So let's see, if we took some white, let's see if we took a bit of warm yellow. And painted with something like this, including putting some glazing fluid in here. Will make it even more transparent. I think I'm going to do this. Put even more glazing fluid in there. So you don't have to do this if you don't want to. And maybe this isn't going to turn out. We'll just see. And so I'm using a bit of a bigger brush here. And just I think I like that. If I didn't like it, I would be in a race to start wiping it off with a damp cloth. I may even just do another coat of it in a moment, but I'm just going to let that sit. Oops. And I'm going to do, obviously, the same thing on these buttons down here. It's a super subtle effect. So I'm just going to, yeah, I'm going to blow dry that. Cool. So it probably looks like maybe you wouldn't even notice the difference on camera. It's like 5% slightly off-white, which I think is going to work well. If I left it that way, it would be really, really bright white. It might look slightly odd, like, I mean, I don't think it would be bad, but I just think it might be, I want this is the original, well, not the very, 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 very original Mickey Mouse. We talked about it at the beginning of the episode. I won't go back there, but this is the I guess you could say the second or third version of Mickey Mouse, like we're talking within the year that it was invented. This is the Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie, and I just wanted to have that slightly vintage quality, that slightly sepia off-white, and I think that does it. So now the next thing here is to add this bit of rouge on the face. So let's do the same thing with glazing fluid. And let's take just a little bit of warm red, mix it into here. You could see how little I used, right? And look how how it transformed that clear glazing fluid. Okay. And once again, I'm going to use a slightly larger brush, and I'm just trying to dry it out as much as possible. Right, I'm just getting it on here, and then now I'm going to take my mop brush, which I haven't used yet, but that is super subtle. It might be too subtle, so I might do a second coat of this. So let's get, I'm going to get a little bit more red on here. I mean, that is super subtle. So I think I'm going to blow dry all of this, and we'll do that one more time. Because if I try to do this now before it's dry, I could peel all that paint off. So even if I'm not happy with it, just take a second, blow dry it, and I know it takes a bit of that extra little second, but it'll save your life. You can watch earlier videos where I didn't mute it, and then I'm like, or I didn't blow dry it after glazing, and I make a big mistake. So learn from all of my mistakes. right? I think up here on this hand, it's done a really effective job. Here on the face, I'm not sure. Maybe we'll do. There's a little bit. This transition didn't work out quite as nicely. Not bad. I mean, again, we're looking at the painting before any of the black is there. You could do what I'm doing right now later on. So if you're kind of like skeptical, like, I don't know if I want to do that. See, this is why I knew it was like, if I started kind of taking a bit of the glaze away. So I'm going to blow dry it and do it one more time. I see Lolly made a contribution using the super chat. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your donation, Lolly. That's so nice of you. And your comment there, best art teacher ever. Well, I think your flattery is very much appreciated. Okay, I think that's good enough. Maybe underneath here. Yeah. Okay, let's do the black and then we'll finish up, because the black's going to take us a good extra half hour here, so gotta get on there at some point, right? So I'm just going to clean a few of these brushes before I move on to the final step here. So let's just take a look and see them side by side before the last little we go into the final home stretch here. So just that little bit of rendering is going to make this really pop. Now there is this little bit inside the hand. I guess I could have done that. Oh, I should have done the... there's always those little details. Okay, let's do that. I was going to say we'll do this later, but if I've got it all mixed up, it certainly won't hurt to do it now. And then Mickey's tongue. Be kind of careful here because I can't quite see my lines. might adjust that, but okay. Okay. So now the question in my mind is, do I want to do my outlining with the Posca pen now, or do I want to paint black first and then do the Posca pen, or do flip-flop back and forth? I'm going to blow dry and have some tea and think about it. Okay, so we're doing really good with time. I know when you get to this point, it just feels like, wow, this feels... But really, all we got to do now is put black on here, and then we're done. That's easier said than done. That could take us longer for some people than others. But... I think it might be easier to now use my Posca pen to do details. Yeah. Everything is dry. That's still a little tacky. That glaze in there. Okay. So actually, just before I go, I'm just going to move a few of these paint tubes out of the way. So if I'm not going to use them, let's just clear up a little bit of studio space. It also just helps put me in that frame of mind. I got some room to spread out, because sometimes when I'm doing little details like this, I like to kind of brace myself and lean into it. So okay. So I'm going to begin with what I know and what I can see. And so I'm going to start with these ears, also because it's towards the left. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to move away from the top left corner down towards the right. I'm just going to now take this. I'm just doing a little test to make sure the Posca pen's working. Remember, all of these shapes are going to be black inside. I could do the black. I could paint it first. The reason why I didn't is it's just another big shape on there that could be confusing. I think probably if I was doing this on my own completely, I probably would just paint it black, but I would be a little bit anxious of people being able to follow my my lead here, so. I see the pen, you know, there's a bit of wet paint. The paint is still, you know, it's 90% dry, but, you know, acrylic paint can take overnight to fully cure. And so sometimes, you know, I'm going over some of these lines and I can see the pen kind of sticking to the paint a little bit. So just being mindful of that. Right, so you can see I'm allowing myself to kind of go in a little bit, right? Not just right up to that white, but I deliberately sort of painted a little bit over. You know, I can see, you know, some of the areas underneath this, the white, are a little bit hard to see. So I can see that part, and I can see a little bit down here. And then I just use my best judgment to see if I can connect that line. So I have lost a little bit of the detail here on the eyes, so I'm going to have to figure that out on my own here. So I'm going to kind of as I get closer here, but before I do that, I want to, like, what can I see that's going to help me? So let's continue here. I see some of the lips here, or the mouth. So that should have swooped down a little bit. Not super happy with that, but we'll come back and touch that up maybe towards the very end, because this needs to be straightened out, but so I might widen this line in a few different places, but let's, I don't want to do any fiddling yet. Drives me nuts looking at that, but nothing I can do about it at the exact moment, so. Okay. So the next thing is to figure out how big this eye is. So maybe let's see. We've got the top of an eye right here. Where does the bottom? So this, if we drag this line across, it looks like we come down just a bit below it. And then this eye is the same, but just a little bit higher. Kind of like if we take this arrow what's going on here, Michael? Looks like it needs to come way down, doesn't it? I think something's happening here. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think that might be able to just, I'm just going to move this down. Let's see if we can erase a little bit of this. I'm going to be careful about taking too much off. Okay. I don't know. I'm not sure. Let's just keep on going, and we'll see when we get close and we start putting in some of the black, the flat black, into these empty shapes. No point in worrying about it until then, so. So there's a little quote-unquote mistake here. So I might widen some of these lines, but let's just keep on going, and we'll finish going around the figure here before we make any judgments or before we get too hard on ourselves. I see John joined the chat. Hello, John. Oh, there's... Where are these? Like right here. Just going to quickly clean this nib here, just rub off any excess, and then just make sure it's still working. Yep. So it just kind of picks up a little bit of paint, right? Especially if there's any wet paint, it can get on the nib and clog it. Okay, now we're getting to the bottom half here. And this tail again. Yikes. Pen kind of stuttered over some of this texture of the paint. Doesn't surprise me that it happened, but it is a little bit frustrating when it does happen, so... Get some of this with the paintbrush. I do feel like this Posca pen is starting to get kind of clogged, and it's behaving less than ideally. I mean, I do have more of them if I wanted to break them out, but see how far we can get before this one is retired. There is like an aspect of doing, of using these Posca pens that I don't particularly like. It almost feels like it makes me a little bit more careful than I want to be, than I would be if I was using a paintbrush, which is ironic in some ways, because because it just gives you the feeling that you could sort of get it perfect. Okay, so I just put my black away, but I'm going to get it back out. Lolly says, how long would you say that pen has lasted so far? Good question. I'd say I've used it in maybe 5 or 6 paintings so far. So I don't know how and I don't use it for entire paintings, just for little details like this. I think it would still be able to probably do another 5 paintings reliably, especially if I take good care of it. So it's okay to paint outside the lines when you're doing this kind of thing too, right? That the pen lines can also be changed, because you might accidentally go outside those lines, or you might want to do it deliberately. This is the first time I've painted after having put my outlines on there, so it's a little bit of a different... It's the first time I've done this on camera anyway. Also trying to manage some of this texture here. I don't usually... Like, I think texture is fine. Obviously, we've done a few paintings that had lots of texture. My favorite of all of the textured paintings that we've done was the Anna Mulka Ahmed painting. We did... I don't know how long ago that was, for Pakistan's Independence Day. That was fun. That was really cool. We did that with the palette knife and got really goopy paint and thick brush strokes. If you haven't done that one and you want something really fun to do, I would strongly consider taking an attempt at that painting, or paintings. We did 2 in like 2.5 hours or something. So I don't know why I feel like I'm being so careful about this painting. And I think part of it is having done these lines first. It just puts me in a different kind of headspace of like, and maybe a little bit less expressive. So if I was to do this painting again, well, I guess it's hard to say, because the reason why I did these lines first is I was afraid that if I just launched right into the painting, that it could be a little bit too confusing for some people to follow. But, you know, every decision has like a consequence, right? And there's nothing wrong with taking more time and being a little more slow and deliberate. It's just, you know, sometimes you want to let loose a little bit, and this painting is a bit more rigid, which is not surprising when you think of, like, in general, animation is a very time-consuming, very deliberate, methodical approach, because you got to figure it all out before you spend hundreds of hours animating something. You want to know exactly what needs to be done so that you don't have to redo anything. For years, I've taught in the animation department at Emily Carr, in the 2D animation department. They just recently split it into 2. It used to be just animation, and now there's 2D and 3D as 2 separate kind of programs. particularly because 3D animation is even more time-consuming than traditional 2D animation. I really prefer this version of Mickey Mouse, which obviously this is why I chose this one, as opposed to the more recent iterations of Mickey Mouse where he has like white eyes with black dots inside. I love, and actually the original Mickey Mouse also had kind of big circles with little black dots for eyes inside. I don't know why they did that for the very first 2 short films, but when they did the Steamboat Willie, this is the style they went back to, and I just think it's far superior. There's something, I don't know what it is, the other style just reminds me, it has a very 80s quality to it. And not that there's anything wrong with the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s, or late 70s. But, I don't know, it just has, and I can, it does look maybe a little bit more, this one, the 80s version, to me, is maybe just a little bit more childlike. And I'm sure, it's not like they made that decision overnight. I'm sure they focus grouped that and worked on that, like rebranding basically for a long time before they settled on this, or moved away from this, I should say. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, slowly but surely. You know what song I have stuck in my head? And if you don't want a song stuck in your head, you can mute for a few seconds. And it's an old song, or I guess old, speaking of the 80s, is a Paul McCartney song called Waterfalls. It's kind of a weird song, like the melody is so strange. Anyway, I keep humming it and singing it to myself. I can't remember any of the lyrics, so I'm not gonna sing it, but so I'm just, while I'm working on the other side of the painting here, I'm going to just touch this up. Okay, and then we'll come down to the feet here. Wow, you got a lot of comments in here. Lolly says, looking great, Michael, though I feel like Mickey has stressed you more than some of the masterpieces you've painted from. Mickey creating mischief. Lolly says, your palette knife painting is one of my favorites so far. Fantastic painting. John says, I think that Mickey's eyes were inspired from Nom Nom Nom. What's that? Why does that sound Nom Nom? Nom Nom Nom. Makes me think of The Muppet Show. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Like Jim Henson. But this is obviously about 60 years before. Well, when Henson's like 60s, right? Okay. So here we are, the shadow down here. To answer your question, Lolly, I don't know if this has stressed me. I don't feel stressed. I guess I just feel like it's a different sort of headspace, I guess, to be in. Like, a lot of detailed work is, it just involves a lot of concentration, so but yeah, I mean, I would say I very rarely feel stressed when I'm painting, which is one of the reasons why I love painting. Is for me, this is sort of like the ultimate stress-relieving activity. So we are very close to being done here, so I'll just start pointing out what the last maybe little bit to do that I want to do. So there is this little bit of white right up here by the nose. Do I want to do that, or am I okay with how mine looks? Might be okay with that. Let's just zoom out and just see if we can walk away at this point. Well, that's Looney Tunes, right? Yeah, that's. Okay, so I think I might be done. I don't know, is there anything I need to touch up? Part of this there's probably going to be a few little details that in the black between the Posca pen and my outline that I might not be able to see until it's fully dry, because it's reflective. I mean, I guess I could use the blow dryer, but even then I'm thinking, like, I just keep seeing these little spots. So yeah, I like that little bit of subtlety always seems to pay off. It's always like a little thing at the moment. You're like, I don't know, does anybody going to notice that? Does that make any difference? And then you paint it and you're like, yeah, I think that does make a difference. Okay. I think that's good enough for me. We haven't really looked at Ubiworks here. I just want to make sure I get his name absolutely right. That's cool. That's cool. I'm pleasantly surprised. You know, it's one of those things where when I was getting the, you know, right before the show began, and I was looking at the background thinking, wait a second, what was I thinking choosing this picture? That's pretty tricky, Michael. And it turned out pretty good. I think, you know, technically the original color has a bit more of a cold yellow in this background, but I think the difference is negligible, right? Okay. Lots of comments in the chat here. Wow, just want to see if there's anything I need to address here. Yeah. Donna says, amazing, Michael. I can't wait to paint this one. Donna, we hope you get back on your feet and get out of the hospital as soon as possible. And, you know, making some art, I think, is a great way of healing, right? And lowering stress, as I see people talking about in the chat there. Wavy Pixel says, one of my favorite artists on YouTube. Are you talking about me or Walt Disney? I hope that's addressed to me, Wavy Pixels. But obviously Walt Disney is also one of my favorite artists too. So, John says, yes, we are done. Thank you, everyone. The painting looks awesome, as always. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for all your generous comments. I really appreciate your support. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There's usually dozens of people who've never seen me ever before and are just joining me for the first time. So if that's you, welcome. Please join our community. Go to the Facebook page, upload your version of today's painting to the Facebook page in just a couple days. On Saturday, we're going to get together, put the paintbrushes down, and look at all the great work that you've been making, right? Because sometimes it's nice for me to take a break and to turn the camera back onto you guys and see what you guys have been up to. Not only the work you've done in class, but the artwork you've made outside of class on your own time, exploring your own subjects and interests. And there's a lot of stuff on there, which is amazing. So I'm not going to be able to get through everything. We're going to go back and look at the Van Gogh paintings we did back in July or August. So we'll take a look at those. Those are some of my favorite things that we've done so far. So that's going to be really, really exciting. Otherwise, please consider leaving a donation. There's a PayPal link in the description below. You can also use the super chat function here in YouTube. If you want to send check or e-transfer or whatever, contact me through my email, which is on my website, or through the Facebook group. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm going to go spend some quality time with my family. So I suggest we all do the same. Give your family an extra little hug or kiss, or call your mom and say, I love you. I love you, Mom, if you're still watching. And we'll see you guys in a couple of days. And, of course, on Sunday, we're also going to be painting for Halloween Vincent van Gogh as well. So we're going to be looking at Van Gogh on Saturday and painting a Van Gogh skeleton painting on Sunday. And I think maybe it might be an evening painting, right? Because I got to do the trick-or-treat thing. So anyway, we'll see you guys in a few days. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night, everyone.